All right. All right. Man, it's good to see folks out. Let me move our COVID Jesus. I don't know, over here a little bit. All right. There's some jokes there somewhere, but I'm going to leave them alone. We are in the middle of a series on James, right? And the title is James, the brother of Jesus, right? So it's a super complex title. If you can't decipher what that means, right? So, but the idea here, and this passage that we're going to get in today, has been one of my favorite passages since I was a teenager, and so I've been excited to get to it, and then when I got to it, and I was talking to Julia earlier about this, like I got to it, and it's like James sometimes writes so clearly that you feel like you're making it complicated when you try to explain it, right? Because you can just read some of what James is going, and it's like, well, what does it mean? It's like it means exactly what it says, and but I'm going to attempt to kind of expound on what James is talking about, and so let's just dive right in. Are you ready? Woo! James chapter 2, picking up at verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. And so faith always causes us to move in a certain direction, but there's something else going on at times, because we don't have just one belief. We actually have a lot of competing beliefs. All right, for instance, all right, so we're in church, so you can't lie. All right, who wears their seatbelt 100% of the time? Wow, you guys are awesome. Well, not me. All right, I try. I do my best. So here's the thing. So we agree, right? Most of us agree that wearing your seatbelt saves lives, right? You're more likely to be safe in an accident if you have your seatbelt on than you are if you don't, right? So why would we not wear it at times? Because listen, if I told you that 100% when you leave here, you're going to get pulled over, you would put it on, right? If I told you you were going to get in an accident when you left here, like, you would put your seatbelt on, right? So what's happening, right, is there's a different belief. You have faith in something else that's causing you to deny what you actually know, right? Because your belief then is, I'm not going to get in an accident this time, right? That's the belief. I mean, that's basically what you're saying, because if you knew you were going to, you would put it on. And so we have an ability, like a unique ability at times, to convince ourselves into inaction. And so we know it's smart to wear a seatbelt, but we don't. And so you are actually using, I thought it was interesting, you're actually using faith in the unknown, right, the future, using faith in the unknown to override that which you do know. And right, so if you have any atheist friends that don't wear their seatbelt, you just let them know. You're putting your faith in the unknown, all right? So you technically have some faith there, right? So you're believing something that hasn't happened yet, and so that kind of causes inaction to a degree. So, and so this kind of moves our belief system, and really the question here today, the whole question is going to be, what do you really believe? Because all of our actions, to some degree, are played out from a belief system that we have. Even if we're not saying our belief system out loud, it's affecting the way that we function. It's affecting the way that we act. I think we actually do this here a little bit, but I used to have, my family, we would have, I guess you call them like homeless bags. And so we would put them in the back of the car, and anytime you would kind of drive by someone that was in need, we'd hand them a bag. You know, it had some food, it had some toiletries, it just had some stuff that was helpful, you know? And so we did this for a while. And so one time it was a nice day out, and I was driving to class downtown, and there's a guy on the side of the road, asked him, and I gave him the bag, handed it to him, and I drove and hung a right, and I was at a stoplight, just one turn away, and a guy pulls up next to me, and he goes, my window's down, and it's at a red light, and he goes, "Hey, I don't know what you gave that guy, but he just looked in it and tossed it over the embankment." And it affected me. My belief system changed a little bit in that moment, right? Because I thought that was just a great thing. I thought it was, and don't get to what I'm not saying yet. If I believed that giving money to someone at a corner would solve homelessness, okay? Homelessness would have been solved. Fair enough? That doesn't mean that I shouldn't be a blessing to somebody that's in need, right? So there's a couple, but I had to get past that belief system that was broken for a minute, where I go, man, I'm out here trying, I'm doing my best, and no one's grateful. And I had to kind of get back, and it's like, oh, you thought this was about you, right? You thought this was about how it made you feel. You're just doing this for you, right? And it's like, okay, so there's a competing, you have to kind of get past some of those things. So, but there's the old adage, like you're familiar with, it's teach a man to fish, right? You know this thing? He eats for a day. Or no, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, right? Teach a man to fish that he'll eat for a lifetime. And it's like, yeah, that's true, as long as there's water, I guess. It's like it would be teaching someone to fish in the desert. But here's the thing about that saying, and because I find it to a degree, I don't want to call it a cop-out, but I did, okay? Because almost anyone who's said that, I've heard say that, okay? At least in defense of their actions, right? I've had conversations about it, but in defense of their own action or inaction. I have also never seen them try to teach someone to fish. You get what I'm saying? Right? So it's like, who is this about? Right? Who is my faith about? What do I actually believe? And these are the things that we begin to kind of ask ourselves. What do I believe? And because belief is actually pretty complicated. Because you might not even know what you believe if you're not analyzing it. You might just be out here functioning and doing things and having no idea actually why you do them. Like, how far over the speed limit are you willing to drive? That's a belief system, right? Because I believe that even if there's a police officer there, if I'm 4 over, I'm fine, right? There's a belief system that's functioning. Is that breaking the law? I don't know. If you do something in front of someone that's supposed to get you and you break the law and it didn't pull you over, like, is that breaking the law? Right? You see how you're going to figure out, what do you believe? What are you going to have for breakfast? Why? Is it, well, the donuts look good, man. But I look at them and I stare at them and I just think about the rise and crash in my sugar, and it might happen while I'm standing up here, you know what I mean? Just fall asleep. Right? So, like, McDonald's, like, I hate to bring them up twice in one Sunday, but, like, how do I want to feel? I never feel good about that decision, but I just make that decision on a regular basis, right? What will you say about your boss to a coworker? Right? What do you believe? What do you believe? Are there cameras on? Right, I get it. Why would you tell jokes in front of coworkers that you wouldn't in front of your mother? Right? There's a belief system. Like, there's a reason you do that, and you might not even know why. You may have never analyzed it. But there's a belief always causes some sort of action. You just might not know what you believe. And so, let's go back to the letter. So James, remember, this is a letter to a mainly Jewish audience, right? And so James has an audience that he's writing to but he's also got something that he wants to talk about, right? Or there's an issue. Most of the letters in the New Testament are addressing an issue that's being raised by the church. And so this one's, he's kind of addressing this. He's going like, listen, it seems like there's a lot of Christians talking, but there's not a lot of Christians doing. That's what he's running up against. I know the church has never dealt with that again since, but there's are you familiar? Anybody familiar with the Pareto distribution? The Pareto distribution. All right, so it's like if you have a graphing calculator, like it's actually a formula that you kind of graph. Remember graphing calculators? You know, that was where I hit all my answers. I mean, not me, other bad kids. The graphing calculator, you would put it in the Pareto distribution. So basically what it is, in layman's terms, it's kind of the 80-20 principle. You familiar with the 80-20 principle? So it's like 80% of the work at your office gets done by 20% of the people, right? 80% of a budget at a church is generally made up of 20% of the congregation. For pastors, most of my world is like, it was 80% of your time is dealing with 20% of the people, right? And so and it actually works. I mean, it works all over, and you just find it to kind of be natural. And so the thing that you kind of understand is that in our churches, I think that's what James is kind of running up against. It's like because it's a law that even goes back. I mean, even Jesus kind of said it to a degree. He said something like, to him who has will be given more, and to him who doesn't, all will be taken. It's something like that. Like, it's kind of the same idea, and it's not that it's the way it's desired to be. It's just kind of a natural law. And this is why if you're one of those 20% of the people keep loading stuff onto you. Like, you're one of if you're the 20, like, people are like, oh, yeah, they'll do it. And it's like, so you'll see it in the church for sure so we have roughly, my guess is, 200 people that would call this church home and show up with at least once in maybe 2 months' time. I'd say we're probably about 200 different people would be it's a complete guess. Based on an average attendance of 100, all right? That's about where that kind of would line up. And so you'll see, though, in the meetings and all the things we do, you'll see about the same 20 people. Maybe, 20% would be about 40 people, so maybe 30 people, same 30 people. Now we load up for dinner, for lunches, right? If you've been down for a lunch, like we load up for that, right? But we're already here, right? And we have to eat anyway, like it's just convenient, So we load that up, and the food is much better than McDonald's. Thank you. I'm glad you paid attention. So, but we need 12 people for June 3rd, And I think I've got one, maybe two people signed up. So I know I'm kind of exiting my honeymoon period right now. It's been a good run. But you have to ask yourself, what do I believe? Because I believe that, and I did church planting for 10 years. I believe that serving the community and loving the community is the best way to draw people in to hear the good news of Jesus. I just believe it is, and I've seen it work. At my church I was pastoring for 10 years, if we averaged 200 people in attendance, we averaged 200 guests a year that guests filled out Connect cards, right? So it's like, and that's all we were doing. We were just literally just loving the community, serving the community and loving the community, right? Just blessing people, just letting people know we exist and we're here and we're alive, right? That there's actually people in this building, right? And it just lets people know, and it gives people an opportunity to go, I'm going to check out what's going on there, right? I like what I see. I want to check out what's going on there. Listen, that's what Jesus was doing. I'm way off my sermon. That's what Jesus was doing, though. Like, he was just going and loving and serving and healing and giving. And people go, Zacharias, right? He's like, I got to get in the tree to see this guy, right? Zacchaeus, thank you. I'm not going to sing the song. Moving on. So, so what does that have to do with James? Well, he's running up some of the same issue, and we have to ask ourselves, well, what do we actually believe? And so verse 18 says this, but someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. James writes, man, he just doesn't pull punches, right? So he's addressing something, but there's a bit of a tension that we have to manage here, because there's two extremes there's almost always two extremes that you have to fight off in life, all right? But there's two extremes here, and so the one is, this is how I grew up. It was very much, I grew up with a very works-based faith. It was like you had to do all the right things. You had to be all the right places, right? You had to have your attendance was what mattered, and these types of things. But then there was another group, like another extreme, and they would say something like what Paul says in Ephesians 2. Verse 8 says, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourself, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast, right? And so you kind of have, so on that extreme, you have people that James is probably frustrated with going, I got faith, so I got grace. And then there's the other side, and you're going, I show up every day. I make all the meals. I'm at Wednesday night, Sunday morning. I'm at the board meetings, right? I'm doing all these things. So there's kind of these two extremes that we're battling. But listen, Paul is saying, and if anyone can say it's not about works, it's not about how many boxes you checked, it's not about how good you pulled it off, it's Paul. Because look what Paul says about himself in Philippians 3. To the church in Philippi. He says, if anyone thinks, or if someone else thinks they have reason to put confidence in the flesh, that's put confidence in their own ability, right? That's the flesh. I have more. That's what Paul's saying. He says, I have more confidence. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness, based on the law. Ooh, I got lost. You ever have your iPad just jump? Regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness, based on the law, faultless. Right? So Paul's like, you want to talk about works? Like, he's like, I'm natural born Jew. Right? You want to talk about the rules? I memorized the Torah. Right? You want to talk about going out and doing stuff? Like, I've done, with all of my might, I've tried to destroy the church, right? Because he was not a Christian at the time. He was a Jewish. He was a Pharisee, right? So Pharisees memorized the law. He goes, and actually, you want to talk about actually following the rules? No one did it better than me. And so this is Paul. And Paul's saying, and it's not by works. He's like, those things don't get you close to God. That's not how it goes. And so there's a tension. You see the tension that they have to manage between, well, grace and faith and actually doing something. Manage that tension. There is in Ephesians chapter 2, he says, for by grace you've been saved. So Ephesians 2, look, there's another verse. There's a verse 10 at the end of that. Ephesians 2, it says, for it is by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it's a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Verse 10, catch this. Verse 10. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So this is the same Paul who just said it's not about works, but it's about a grace through a faith that is given to you, but it produces works, right? It produces something in us, there's something in us that should be changing. Listen, we every now and then I try to pause and say if there's a passage that you need to just latch onto or you want to memorize or highlight or put up, verse 10, that Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's handiwork. The New Living Translation says, we are God's masterpiece. And it's like, we live in a world Especially some of the church world. Like, God has created you the way that you are, right? And so when we live in a church or a church world that says, well, you can't be attracted to this person, or you can't love like this, or you can't be like that. It's like God's created something in you, all right, for good works. He's created you the way that you are for good works that he's prepared in advance. Now, but, someone say it's a big but. Also, I want to say this right. The world also wants to tell you that you're just fine the way you are. And it's like, I don't know, is your life perfect? Then you could be a lot more, right? You could be smarter. You could be more disciplined, right? You could be more loving. You could be a better parent. You could be a better child, right? You could be all these things. You could be these. So we have places to grow, but also you are a masterpiece of God. And so the tension, the Hebrew author, you don't have this up there, but the Hebrew author says it this way. He says, for by one sacrifice he made perfect forever those who are being made holy. Let me say that again. For by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. So you can go home, right, and just tell your spouse, your loved ones, at church I was told I was perfect. So you can have your opinion, or we can read the Bible, all right? Right? But there's this, that we're also growing, right? So there's this idea that God is moving us, and he's making us into and conforming us into his image, but you're also a masterpiece. That God has also created you specifically the way you are to do a specific work that he is preparing for you. Got it? All right. Now, there's a reference that I keep making, and it's about the tree. All right, we've been talking about this tree. I mean, maybe about once a month I bring up this tree and its fruit. But James says, so salvation is, or Paul says, salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone. And then James goes, but if your faith isn't transforming you, if you're not different, if it hasn't changed you, do you really have faith? And so Jesus says this in Matthew 7. When he's talking about a tree, he says, watch out for false prophets. Watch out for pretenders. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. And so again, going back to kind of the way I was raised, like when you said a prayer, you would come to the altar, all right, and then you would say a prayer, and you would ask Jesus into your heart, and you're not going to find that in the Bible, but it's just kind of what the church has been doing. And so you asked Jesus into your heart, and then you had about 2 months to quit cussing, all right? That was it. You had to figure it out. There's not a lot of time, right? That's just how I grew up. And so, but listen, a new tree. How much fruit does a new tree produce? Almost none, if you're lucky, right? It's growing. It's rooting itself, right? It's becoming, something's happening inside, right? And so, but when we're looking at our lives, when you put your faith in Jesus, there should be a change that starts to take place in you. Now, other people might not notice it immediately, but what you start to go is conviction. You start to feel the conviction. You go, oh, that's what I got to work on. Oh, and it's not what someone else is telling you to work on. It's what the Holy Spirit's telling you to work on. And that's the difference between kind of a grace and a legalistic way of looking at salvation and Christianity. It's like God's working through you in ways that no one else can see at times. And he's rooting you so that you can produce fruit. All right? Back to James. So to end the chapter, James kind of reaches way back into the Old Testament and brings out two examples. All right, the first one is a wild one. I'll try to go through it pretty quickly. Verse 20, James 2, verse 20. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? Right? Yeah. So Isaac and Abraham, anyone who familiar with the story of Abraham offering his kid on the altar? Right. So first things first, if God tells you to sacrifice your child, it's not God. We're not doing that anymore, right? That's not a thing, okay? So what was happening, right? So first off, God had never intended the actual sacrifice to happen, right? So that was not God's intent. Now for Abraham, I know you're looking at Abraham going like, you are crazy, man. But child sacrifice, I know kids, just bear with me, was a standard practice, all right, back then. This is before the law. This is before Moses, right? This is way back, right? And so it was a practice that happened. And it happened even after that in all kinds of different tribes around the world. It was a practice. So for Abraham, it wasn't like he's not seeing it through 21st century eyes, right? He's seeing it through the culture that he's familiar with, that he left, okay? And so this is how the Hebrew author says it. He says in verse 17, Hebrews 11:17, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promise was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. And ironically, on the same mountain where God would sacrifice his only son and see him resurrected. Wild, right? Wild. And so James continues and he says this. You see that his faith and his actions were working together. And his faith was made complete. Right? So he had a faith, and it was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see, a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. And so in the same way, not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. As the body with the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. I love the story of Rahab. Rahab was a Jerichoan prostitute while the Israelites were wandering in the desert. All right? She was not a Hebrew. She didn't know Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. She didn't know the sacrificial system. She didn't know about the tabernacles. She didn't know about any of the rules or who God was. All she had heard was the miracles that God had been working through his people outside of their town. And so when they show up to her house, and she gives them over, and she actually talked her into lying to Jericho so that they could take down the walls, right? And remember, they walk around the walls of Jericho. It's faith. Her faith was given to her by the actions of others, right? There was no preaching. There was no sermon. There was no altar call. She had just heard rumors about what God had been doing within the midst of his people. And when she was confronted with somebody, she goes, no, I'm with you guys. I'll do whatever I got to do. I'm with you. And then so her actions, apart from her faith, are what help break down the walls. And so here's what I want you to go with this week. If you want to know what you actually believe, and you should, right? You should want to know what you believe. Look at how you act. Your actions tell you exactly what you believe, even if you don't know it, even if it conflicts with what you think you believe. Because a lot of us say, well, I believe this, I believe that, and it's like, well, your actions don't show any of that. Your actions actually say you believe X, Y, and Z. And then if someone asked you to show them your faith, hey, show me your faith, how would you respond? I think that's enough. What James has for us, that's probably enough for a while, but I'll have something else next week. But we take those two questions and just let them marinate in your heart. What do I believe? And what do people think I believe based on what I do? Right? God bless you, church.
Church, stand.